The day the sky cracked open over Boston, everything changed. It wasn't a real crack, of course. No thunder, no apocalypse. Just a quiet shift, like the city itself exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The kind of shift you only notice when your life depends on it. Elon Musk stood at the window of a small office on the second floor of a nondescript building near the Charles River. His world, once filled with roaring engines and ambitious blueprints, now felt unsettlingly silent. Across the country, thousands of tech workers were being displaced, not by layoffs this time, but by something stranger: the rise of hyper-automated AI systems that rendered entire departments obsolete overnight. No pink slips. No meetings. Just an email that said, "Your role has been integrated." Boston, with its tight-knit tech and academic communities, was hit harder than most. Cafes that once buzzed with startup chatter now sat half-empty. Whiteboards that once mapped dreams now collected dust. Elon watched as a young man in a worn jacket wandered the street below, staring at his phone, looking lost. It reminded him of something, a feeling he hadn't touched in years. The raw uncertainty of being untethered, of waking up and realizing the map you had been following no longer matched the terrain. He thought of his own journey, the lonely years, the doubts, the risks that almost broke him. He hadn't gotten here because the path was clear. He had gotten here because he moved forward even when it wasn't. Maybe, Elon whispered to himself, this is the beginning, not the end. He turned from the window, grabbed his jacket, and headed out into the misty Boston morning. By mid-morning, Elon found himself standing in front of an abandoned warehouse in East Cambridge. It had once been a bustling makerspace for young innovators, but now it was shuttered, its "Dream It, Build It" sign hanging crookedly, battered by months of neglect. The lock was old, the door stubborn. But with a little patience, and some creative elbow grease, Elon managed to push it open. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and forgotten ideas. Tables were still scattered with half-built drones, 3D printers, and soldering kits. The place wasn't dead. It was sleeping. And maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for a reason to wake up. Elon sent a message to a few people he trusted, not the high-flying CEOs or the polished media darlings, but the real builders, the coders, the machinists, the designers who had been pushed aside by a world moving too fast. The message was simple. If you've got a dream and know where to build it, meet me at the old Forge Hall tomorrow. Bring coffee. Bring courage. Leave your titles at the door. He didn't expect much. Maybe a handful of people. Maybe none. But hope, he knew, was stubborn. The next morning, the sun barely cracked the horizon when Elon unlocked the door again. To his surprise, a small group had already gathered. Not hundreds. Maybe 20. But they came. There was Jordan, a robotics engineer whose entire team had been automated out of existence. Samira, a single mother and former UX designer who had been integrated out of her job while raising 2 kids. Miguel, a machinist who could still build anything with his hands but had no one left who needed him. They brought coffee, half-eaten bagels, and laptops that hadn't been updated in months. They brought stories too, of loss, of anger, of uncertainty. But most importantly, they brought something else, a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Elon stood on an old table and spoke. I don't have all the answers, he said, his voice steady, real. Hell, I don't even know all the questions. But I know this, the future doesn't get built by people waiting for permission. It gets built by people who show up. He paused, looking out at their tired but determined faces. So let's show up. For ourselves. For each other. A slow murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a rally. It was something quieter, something harder to define. But it was real. And sometimes, real is enough. Outside, the mist began to lift, and for the first time in a long while, the streets of Boston seemed to breathe again. Word traveled faster than Elon expected. By the end of the first week, Forge Hall wasn't just a dusty warehouse anymore, it was alive. The floor was strewn with hastily marked zones, one corner for hardware tinkering, another for coding marathons, another for brainstorming sessions where no idea was too wild to sketch on a cracked whiteboard. They had no funding, no polished decks, no media coverage. What they had was hunger. Real, human hunger, to create, to connect, to matter. Jordan started teaching evening classes on robotics basics. Not for profit, but for people who thought tech had left them behind. Samira organized child care shifts with the other parents so no one had to choose between building a dream and raising their kids. Miguel built workbenches from discarded pallets, each one sanded and polished like he was building altars for creation. And Elon? He didn't lead from a stage or a glass office. He led by wiring circuits, sanding tables, fixing broken coffee machines. He sat in circles on the floor, scribbling ideas with college dropouts and seasoned engineers alike. Forge Hall wasn't a business. It was a rebellion against despair. One night, around 1 a.m., after most had gone home, Elon sat at a battered workbench next to Jordan. "Think this will work?" Jordan asked, nudging a prototype drone made from salvaged parts. Elon smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is we tried." Jordan laughed, a low, exhausted laugh that shook some of the dust from the air. Outside, the city remained indifferent. No parades. No headlines. Just a few lights burning in a forgotten warehouse. But inside, a small, unstoppable current had started. A month later, the first real test came. The landlord of the Forge building, a hard-nosed man named Wallace, known for flipping old properties for tech condos, showed up unannounced. "You're squatting," Wallace said, his voice sharp. "We're reviving," Elon answered calmly. Wallace wasn't moved. He gave them 30 days to vacate. Panic rippled through the community. Where would they go? Who would take them in? That night, the Forge family gathered in the main hall, sitting on overturned crates and folding chairs. Elon stood before them, not as a titan of industry, but as one of them. "Maybe we lose this building," he said. "Maybe we don't. But we don't lose this." He tapped his chest. "We don't lose the fire we started. Buildings can fall. Movements can't." Samira stood up, her voice steady. "We stay." Miguel stood beside her. "We fight." Jordan added, "We build." The room roared, not with noise, but with the quiet, electric certainty that they had something no eviction notice could erase. The next day, a call went out across Boston, help needed at Forge Hall. "Bring whatever you have." They came. Not just coders and engineers. Librarians. Retirees. Cafe owners. Students. Even a group of laid-off nurses who just wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. They fixed the plumbing, patched the roof, cleaned graffiti from the walls. They created a mosaic of handprints on the front door, each one painted bright blue, a promise that they belonged here. And slowly, improbably, the Forge became more than a place. It became a promise. The fight to save Forge Hall transformed the community. Word of the battle spread across Boston like a current through wet wires. Local news picked up the story, displaced tech workers turn abandoned warehouse into beacon of hope, and soon volunteers poured in from across the city. But attention brought scrutiny. City officials arrived, clipboards in hand, rattling off codes and permits the Forge had violated. Health inspectors raised eyebrows at the makeshift kitchens, the worn-out couches. Even the fire department issued a warning about the old wiring. One wrong step, and the dream could collapse. Elon gathered the core team, Jordan, Samira, Miguel, and a few others who had become the heartbeat of the hall. "We can't afford to be rebels without a cause anymore," he said. "If we want this to last, we have to build it right." For the next several weeks, Forge Hall shifted from scrappy survival to something more deliberate. They crowdfunded enough to bring in volunteer electricians and carpenters. They filed permits. They held town halls with the local community. Neighbors who had once grumbled about the noise now showed up with casseroles and paintbrushes. The Forge evolved. They started offering free weekend workshops, coding basics, creative writing, mechanical engineering for beginners. Local businesses donated supplies. Retired teachers volunteered to run classes. The hall echoed with laughter and learning. For the first time in months, the people who had been displaced by progress felt not just useful, but needed. One Saturday afternoon, a young girl named Amara, no older than 9, wandered into Forge Hall with her father. She clutched a battered notebook filled with sketches, solar-powered playgrounds, bridges made of recycled plastics. Miguel kneeled down to her level. "What do you want to build?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "I want to build a place where nobody feels small." Elon watched from across the room, something tightening in his chest. He saw, in Amara's hesitant smile, a reflection of every forgotten dream the world had tried to bury. That night, Forge Hall voted unanimously to open a children's lab, a space where kids like Amara could imagine without limits. But not everything was easy. Wallace, the landlord, returned, this time with lawyers. He was determined to sell the building to a tech firm offering millions. A court date was set. Forge Hall had 3 weeks to vacate unless they could raise the astronomical sum to buy the property themselves. The news hit like a gut punch. For a moment, despair crept back in. Meetings turned somber. Laughter faded. Even the walls seemed to lean a little heavier. Elon called an emergency gathering. No speeches. No slogans. Just a single question scrawled across the whiteboard. What is a place worth if it makes you believe in yourself again? The answers poured out. It's worth my savings. It's worth my weekends. It's worth the risk. Samira stood up, holding a mason jar stuffed with bills, tips from her side gig at a cafe. It's worth this, she said simply. The energy shifted again. Not desperate. Determined. They launched a campaign called #ForgeTheFuture. Stories flooded in, from Boston, then from beyond. Former Forge members who had moved away. Kids who had taken their first robotics class there. Families who had been lifted by the food drives, the free clinics, the whispered belief that hope still had a home. Donations trickled in, then poured. A retired professor left his estate. A local brewery hosted fundraisers. Anonymous donors matched contributions. And just days before the deadline, Forge Hall bought its freedom. The night the papers were signed, the Forge family gathered in the hall. No speeches. No cameras. Just a battered workbench pulled into the center of the room. Everyone placed something on it, a hand-painted stone, a signed blueprint, a child's drawing. Elon placed a small, battered model rocket he had built decades ago, long before anyone knew his name. To remind us, he said, voice thick with emotion, that even the smallest sparks can light the way. The lights in Forge Hall burned late into the night, not because they had to, but because no one wanted to leave. They had built something the world said was impossible. And for the first time in a long time, they knew they belonged to each other, and to the future they had dared to forge. Forge Hall wasn't just a building anymore. It was a living organism, messy, vibrant, and stubbornly alive. Weeks after they secured the building, a new rhythm settled in. Classes expanded. Projects launched. People who once saw themselves as broken now saw themselves as builders. Amara's children's lab grew faster than anyone expected. Her solar-powered playground prototype made it onto the evening news, and soon donations rolled in specifically for the kids' programs. Miguel led a new initiative, teaching basic carpentry to teenagers from the local shelter. Samira organized the Mothers Who Code program, offering free childcare during workshops. Jordan built a robotics league that matched former tech workers with high school students for mentorship. And Elon? He stayed where he had always been, in the middle of the noise and laughter, sleeves rolled up, quietly building with them. But Elon knew something many did not. The real challenge wasn't saving Forge Hall. It was letting it go. Because true leadership wasn't about holding on. It was about setting others free. One cool spring evening, after a day spent repairing a broken 3D printer, Elon stood alone in the center of the hall. He looked around, at the glowing workstations, the murals painted by kids, the old banners now stitched into quilts of memories. Forge Hall didn't need him to survive anymore. It had become its own fire. And so, quietly, Elon stepped back. Not with fanfare. Not with announcements. He simply shifted from leader to supporter, mentor to neighbor. Forge Hall was no longer Elon's project. It was Boston's movement. Months later, Elon sat at a small cafe overlooking the Charles River, watching families and students bustle past. A book lay open on the table beside his coffee. He scribbled notes into a battered notebook, planning his next quiet project, something smaller, something deeper. A teenage boy approached, awkward and nervous. "Sir," he said, holding out a crumpled sheet of paper. I made a blueprint for a water filtration system. I don't know if it's any good, but could you take a look?" Elon smiled. He took the paper, studied it carefully, then looked up. "Tell me what inspired you." And just like that, a new seed was planted. Because Forge Hall had taught Elon, and all who walked through its worn doors, that the future wasn't built by the loudest voices or the fastest hands. It was built by those who listened. By those who believed. By those who stayed when staying was hard. True progress isn't about dominating the world, it's about empowering others to build it alongside you. Real leadership means knowing when to step back and let others shine, trusting that the seeds you've planted will grow strong without your constant hand. Hope isn't some grand declaration shouted from rooftops, it's made in 1,000 quiet, stubborn decisions to believe in someone, even when the world forgets to. In a time obsessed with faster, louder, and bigger, Elon Musk and the Forge Hall community proved something beautifully radical. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to believe quietly, build stubbornly, and lift others relentlessly. If this story sparked something inside you, a whisper of a dream, a memory of a forgotten goal, don't let it fade. Choose to act. Choose to build. Choose to believe. And if you need guidance on that journey, here are 2 books that capture the spirit of Forge Hall. The Obstacle is the Wave by Ryan Holiday, a masterclass on turning challenges into triumphs, teaching resilience through history's great minds, and Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Duckworth, a powerful reminder that while talent may open the door, perseverance builds the house. Take the first step. Grab a copy. Start building your own forge. The world needs your light.